In the Marvel Universe, Tony Stark's iconic retort, genius billionaire playboy philanthropist, packs a punch, drawing admiration and applause. But the reality is that within the ranks of superheroes, the label of genius has become almost commonplace. When you take off the armor, what are you really? In the case of Tony Stark, it turns out he's just one of many intellectual heavyweights in a world brimming with brilliance. Consider Bruce Banner, the Hulk. He's not just a powerhouse of destruction, but also a brilliant scientist capable of developing gamma radiation solutions while obliterating cities. Then there's Reed Richards, also known as Mr. Fantastic. His ability to stretch is impressive, but what really sets him apart is his genius-level intellect, enabling him to craft rockets, time machines, and more in a single afternoon. When compared to these overachievers, Stark's intelligence can seem almost pedestrian. This growing trend of genius heroes signals a significant shift in how we define greatness. For most of human history, heroes weren't defined by their intellect or inventiveness. They were champions in battle, larger-than-life figures whose feats of strength were often the result of divine gifts or noble bloodlines. Think of mythological figures like Achilles or King Arthur. Strength and courage were their defining traits, not their ability to invent or innovate. Their worth was not measured by the precision of their minds, but by their valor in combat or their royal heritage. However, the 20th century saw a shift in this paradigm, ushering in the rise of the intellectual hero. With the advent of sci-fi, characters like Superman were introduced, blending extraordinary abilities with technological marvels. Marvel, however, took things a step further by focusing not just on the circumstances that created their heroes, but also on the extraordinary intellects that shaped them. Heroes like Tony Stark weren't just defined by their physical feats. They were brilliant minds navigating a world that demanded more than just strength. Their greatness lay in their ability to balance the demands of brawn and brain, a reflection of the complex world we live in today, where intellect is just as valued as power. In this new era of superheroes, it's clear. The truly exceptional are those who combine their mental prowess with their personal flaws and human relatability. They aren't perfect gods or immortal beings. They are, like Tony Stark, brilliant but deeply flawed individuals who wrestle with the complexity of their own humanity. And it's this combination that makes them not just superheroes, but symbols of greatness in a world that demands both intelligence and courage. Marvel's introduction of a new pantheon of flawed genius heroes in the mid-20th century is not just a creative shift. It reflects the cultural anxieties and ambitions of the era. These heroes, often born out of scientific ingenuity or radioactive accidents, mirror a society grappling with the profound implications of scientific progress. They represent the intersection of incredible promise and terrifying potential, a duality that was particularly palpable during the Cold War and its aftermath. The backdrop to this transformation is deeply rooted in the period's defining moment, the 1959 atomic bomb test. This test, along with the events leading up to and following it, symbolized humanity's unprecedented control over nature's most destructive forces. The atomic bomb wasn't merely a weapon. It was the ultimate manifestation of science's reach and the complex relationship between creation and destruction. In a world where the power to annihilate civilizations was suddenly in the hands of human beings, the notion of scientific discovery became a double-edged sword. While it promised advancements in energy, medicine, and technology, it also held the potential to undo all of humanity's progress. Marvel's heroes were a direct reflection of this tension. Characters like Spider-Man, the Hulk, and Iron Man were born from science. Whether through radioactive exposure, genetic mutation, or technological innovation, their stories weren't just about superhero feats. They were also about the risks of unchecked scientific experimentation. Bruce Banner's transformation into the Hulk, for instance, was the result of a failed experiment with gamma radiation, symbolizing how humanity's pursuit of knowledge could lead to uncontrollable consequences. Similarly, Tony Stark's creation of the Iron Man suit, while brilliant, was often driven by personal flaws and the consequences of his own actions. His genius both an asset and a curse. These flawed genius heroes also reflected the anxieties of a society that had to reconcile the immense potential of scientific progress with its possible horrors. The nuclear age had ushered in an era where science was no longer just a force for good. It was a power that needed to be controlled and wielded with extreme caution. The new breed of Marvel heroes embodied this moral complexity. They weren't just perfect paragons of virtue, but complex individuals struggling with their own flaws, their own creations, and the unintended consequences of their genius. In this way, Marvel's flawed geniuses mirrored the evolving cultural landscape of the time. Their stories tapped into the collective fear and fascination with science, serving as both a reflection of and a response to the era's profound transformations. Just as the atomic bomb represented the dangerous potential of human discovery, Marvel's heroes highlighted the simultaneous promise and peril of intellect, reminding us that greatness, like science itself, is a double-edged sword. As the Cold War unfolded, the nuclear arms race became a defining element of global politics. The rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union was ostensibly about ideology, liberal democracy versus totalitarian communism. But it was just as much about demonstrating technological and military supremacy. Every missile test, every advancement in nuclear weaponry, and every launch into space served as a statement of dominance. When the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik in 1957, the first ever artificial satellite, it sent shockwaves through America, sparking both panic and a renewed push for innovation. This context shaped Marvel's storytelling. The heroes it created were born of science, embodying humanity's creative brilliance while wrestling with the unintended consequences of technological progress. Figures like Iron Man, who builds his armor to save himself and later others, or the Hulk, whose power stems from an experiment gone awry, reflect the dual nature of scientific advancement: the ability to create and destroy, to empower and to devastate. At the same time, these characters served as a way to process the anxieties of the time. They made the complexities of the nuclear age and the space race relatable, humanizing the power of science while reminding readers of its risks. Marvel's heroes weren't perfect. They were flawed and often haunted by their own creations. This mirrored the real-world tension of an era where progress was exciting but also fraught with peril. While the Cold War was a time of fear and competition, it was also a time of tremendous technological advancement, much of which continues to benefit humanity today. Marvel's embrace of pretend science not only entertained, but also encouraged audiences to engage with the potential and responsibility that comes with innovation. It's a reminder that the tools we create, whether in fiction or reality, are shaped by how we choose to wield them. In the charged atmosphere of the Cold War, political leaders like John F. Kennedy capitalized on the nation's fears, warning of a so-called missile gap. Although largely unfounded, this notion suggested that Soviet missile technology had vastly surpassed American capabilities, fueling public paranoia and further justifying aggressive investments in defense and technological advancement. It was against this backdrop of looming nuclear annihilation and intense scientific rivalry that in 1961, Atlas Comics rebranded itself as Marvel Comics. Stan Lee, the writer-editor leading Marvel's new vision, ushered in this era with a groundbreaking creation, the Fantastic Four. The team's origin was deeply tied to the cultural zeitgeist. Reed Richards, a genius rocket scientist, becomes the quintessential Cold War hero, thrust onto the front lines of the space race. In his rush to beat the Soviets, he and his crew hastily launch a mission into space, only to be exposed to cosmic rays that transform them into superpowered beings. This fusion of science and heroism resonated powerfully with a generation growing up under the shadow of the Cold War. In this era, portraying scientists as heroes for the youth wasn't just creative, it was strategic. The US government and society at large were reconceptualizing science as the linchpin of national defense. With the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik in 1957, the race for technological supremacy became a matter of survival. America needed bright scientific minds to innovate in nuclear weaponry, missile defense, and space exploration. This urgency gave rise to initiatives like the National Defense Education Act of 1958, which allocated over $1 billion to bolster science education in schools and universities. A House report supporting the bill underscored its significance. The very survival of our free country may depend in large part upon the education we provide for our young people now. Even local communities embrace this ethos. High schools built in the 1950s and 60s often featured imagery celebrating science, stars, telescopes, and even nuclear explosions, reminding students of the critical role they were expected to play in safeguarding the nation's future. In this context, Marvel's Fantastic Four served not only as entertainment, but also as an emblem of the times, casting the scientist not just as a problem solver, but as a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of existential threats. In the radioactive space age, the archetype of the righteous hero shifted dramatically. No longer emerging from the ranks of valiant infantry, like Marvel's World War II icon, Captain America, the new saviors were forged in the classrooms and laboratories of America's erudite youth. Stan Lee and his collaborators at Marvel were acutely attuned to this cultural transition, reflecting it through their creation of characters that epitomized the fusion of scientific brilliance and heroism. Following the success of the Fantastic Four, Lee introduced Bruce Banner, a reserved atomic scientist whose transformation into the Hulk blurs the line between man of intellect and man of action. Banner, steadfastly asserting himself as a scientist rather than a warrior, underscores the obsolescence of this dichotomy. It is his genius and his catastrophic exposure to the very gamma-ray bomb he invented that transforms him into the Hulk, a figure of primal strength born from scientific innovation gone awry. This theme of scientific empowerment runs through many of Marvel's early 1960s heroes. Peter Parker, a gifted but awkward teenager, gains his Spider-Man powers after a radioactive spider bites him during a nuclear science exhibit. Tony Stark, the brilliant and charismatic arms manufacturer, uses his ingenuity to construct a power suit, escaping his Vietnamese communist captors to become Iron Man. These characters weren't just heroes. They were embodiments of the era's faith in technological progress and the belief that intellectual prowess could triumph over brute force. Yet the cultural anxieties of the Cold War loomed large in their stories. These heroes honed their powers not against abstract villains, but against enemies steeped in anti-communist allegory. Iron Man battles the Crimson Dynamo and Black Widow, a Soviet femme fatale whose charm masks her dangerous loyalties. The Hulk discovers his trusted lab partner Igor is a Soviet spy passing atomic secrets to the grotesque scientist Gargoyle. Spider-Man's first major foe, the Chameleon, reflects fears of Soviet espionage, using his shape-shifting abilities to infiltrate American society undetected. These narratives served as a direct reflection of societal anxieties during the Cold War, dramatizing the fears of Soviet infiltration, nuclear warfare, and ideological conflict. Marvel's heroes weren't just fighting for justice. They were symbolic champions of American ingenuity and resilience, reassuring readers that the same science that threatened annihilation could also offer salvation when placed in the right hands. The Cold War era, often caricatured as an age of undemocratic witch hunts and jingoistic propaganda, was also a time of genuine peril. While it's easy to dismiss American fears as reactionary and ignorant, the threat was real. Soviet agents had infiltrated federal agencies and universities, and domestic organizations like the American Communist Party functioned as extensions of a hostile foreign government. The prospect of nuclear annihilation loomed large, with the world teetering on the brink of war during crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Children practiced duck and cover drills while their parents absorbed grim public service announcements on surviving a nuclear apocalypse. Stan Lee, reflecting on his comics from the early 1960s, acknowledged how the anxieties of the time shaped Marvel stories. When communism was the big bugger all here in America, almost all our villains were communists. And no matter what the problem was in society at the time, it sort of would show itself in our books. This cultural resonance was key to Marvel's success. The company's heroes weren't just fantastical. They addressed genuine societal fears while embodying the era's faith in science and technology. Marvel's fixation on science wasn't arbitrary. Its heroes, born from radioactive accidents, advanced machinery, and the space race, reflected a culture that saw scientific progress as both salvation and survival. This grounding in reality made the heroes relatable icons, figures who not only combated supervillains, but also symbolized the triumph of scientific possibility over existential threats. Marvel even prefigured the momentous 1969 moon landing. 6 years earlier, in a whimsical twist, the Fantastic Four landed on the lunar surface to confront an army of communist super apes. While not quite Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, the story captured the imaginative possibilities of space exploration that were captivating the public consciousness. The intersection of comics and nuclear science wasn't limited to Cold War allegories. Superhero narratives promoted the idea that nuclear energy could be a force for good, capable of solving humanity's greatest challenges. Today, as global temperatures rise and the need for clean energy grows urgent, that notion remains relevant. The documentary The New Fire, Fusion Revolution explores how modern scientists, including experts from MIT and Berkeley, argue that nuclear fusion is humanity's best shot at powering the world without fossil fuels. Whether you're skeptical or hopeful about nuclear energy, the documentary offers fresh perspectives and critical insights.